Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I am Lalita Duperan. I am the Associate Director of the Center for South Asia, and I want to start off today's event by thanking our co-sponsors for today. That's the Abbasi program in Islamic Studies, the program in Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies, and Queer Student Resources here at Stanford. I want to also thank CSA Director Anna Bigelow for supporting the team in all the ways, always. Stanford alum Madia Achter for mentoring us for today's event. And of course, Manar Flevel-Kanier for all her hard work, always. We traditionally start our events with a land acknowledgement provided to us by Stanford. And while I do want to acknowledge that Stanford sits on the unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and I do want to encourage all of us to think how we can be in active solidarity with Indigenous people. There is, at this particular point in time, so much more to say. And I think much, if not all of it, can be encapsulated in the phrase free, free Palestine. Today's webinar came about because I read the book. That's really the story. I read the book about a year and a half ago and was absolutely blown away by it as a queer person, fascinated with religion, scholar of religion in some ways. I just loved it, spoke to me in so many ways. And I emailed Lamya and I was kind of not really expecting to hear from her because busy times. And she wrote back immediately and we arranged a webinar. It took a little while to get it together, but here we are. And I'm so delighted to introduce to you the moderator for today's event, Zarif Ahsan. Zarif has been the CSA Markaz Fellow, and I also want to thank the Markaz Center for all their help and support always. And as CSA Markaz Fellow, Zarif has created events that kind of help build community among undergraduate students at Stanford and the Center for South Asia and the Markaz community as well. I've learned so much from and with you, Zarif. Thank you so much for being here. Please take the mic from me.
Will do. I'm sorry if that was already said, but I'm so excited for today's event. I also am very interested because I hashtag read the book. I was first introduced to it in through Queer Student Resources. They gifted a copy of HIJAB Butch Blues my sophomore year through the Queer Salon program. But I'm so excited here to be introducing Lamya to be presenting a sort of book talk on their book. And they write under a pseudonym, but I have a little bio here for them. They're a profound, unapologetic queer Muslim writer who lives in New York right now. And their memoir sort of centers the existence and ethos of queer Muslim identity by relating it to many different figures in the Quran. Some examples are Maryam, Yusuf, Nuh, Asiya, and sort of navigates these different experiences of faith, community existence, and resistance. I really enjoyed the book. I found it incredibly nuanced, self-aware, reflective, radical. But in the time since I've read it, it's won the Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize and the Stonewall Non-fiction Book Award, and also was a finalist for the Lambda Literary and Publishing Triangle Award. Again, I cannot understate how important this book is, especially in an environment, both in general and in Muslim spaces where queer Muslims are very invisible. But without further ado, I will pass it off to Lamya. I'm so excited to hear their words about their book.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the extremely kind introduction and just such, I guess, like thoughtful summaries and about my book. I feel really, really honored to be here talking to you all. I started writing this book a while ago now, and it took me a while to write, but the big reason that I wanted to write it is because I believe very deeply in the power of stories, specifically vulnerable personal stories, and using those stories as a ways of making larger sort of like political arguments and thinking about society, thinking about Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, racism, among other things. So the book is a memoir, and in it, what I do is I take these stories and figures from the Quran and retell these stories as queer, brown immigrant narratives, alongside stories from my own queer, brown immigrant life. I was born in a country in South Asia and moved to a country in the Middle East when I was 4, and ended up in the US for college, and have been here since. The book is really a journey of these journeys, and it's in it. I also sort of like come into my queerness in certain ways, and talk about sort of like discovering my queerness, really coming into it and embracing it, and then finding community and finding queer Muslim community, finding my people essentially. So I'll be reading 2 excerpts from the book. The first excerpt is actually from the first chapter, and I think it gives a flavor of what I'm trying to do in the book. It's from a chapter named Maryam, Maryam as in the mother of Isa, also known as Jesus in other traditions. And essentially, where I'll be reading from, I'm 14. I'm in this Islamic school in this country in the Middle East, alongside all of these sort of like girls from all over the world who are also in similar situations as me. Their parents, work in this country. We live here. We have a very sort of like distant relationship with the country, and I'm really struggling with being 14 and sort of like just realizing my queerness, just realizing that this sort of like desire that's been there as part of my life for a very long time is actually like something that it's something that is seen as sort of like wrong, or it's out of place, and I have this totally inappropriate crush on my teacher, and I've just realized that what I'm feeling are like just romantic feelings, so I'm 14 and I'm in Quran class, and we've just started reading the story of Maryam, and the week before, we've heard about Maryam being in labor as she's giving birth to Isa, and just screaming in rage and pain and sort of like complaining to God and screaming at God that she wants to die. And I've just been so taken by this. It's blown my mind that someone can talk to God like this. Someone who's seen as this, big figure in Islam is actually talking to God like this. So that's where this excerpt starts off, and I will take it from there. The week after reading about Maryam wanting to die, I looked forward to the next Quran class. I'm jittery as the time approaches and eager to start walking to the language lab. As usual, my class of 22 girls whittles down to a little more than half as we wind our way through the school building to the annex on the other side of campus. The other girls are unhurried when we get there. They take their time choosing seats and chattering and settling, but I'm fast. Notebook out, pen out, headphones on, ready to start the lesson. I'm jumpy, hyper aware of everyone and everything, anxious that I'm being transparent, that everyone can tell that I'm craving the next installment of the story of Maryam, that I'm leaning in so as not to miss a word, that I'm grasping at everything I can learn about this woman who complains to God and wants to die. But today is a review lesson, the Quran teacher tells us, to prep for our midterm the week after. I'm devastated. I'll have to wait an entire week to know what happens next while we recap the 30 or so verses that we've already read, and then review the recitation, the hard words, and the English translation for our upcoming test. Someone in the front row starts reading the beginning of the surah aloud, and I sigh, slip into my usual half-listening mode. I nudge my best friend sitting next to me and ask to borrow her multicolored pens for doodling. Then someone reads the translation of these verses aloud. And mention in the book the story of Maryam when she withdrew from her family to a place toward the east. And she took in seclusion from them a screen. Then we sent to her our angel, and he represented himself to her as a well-proportioned man. She said, "Indeed, I seek refuge in the most merciful from you. So leave me if you should be fearing of Allah. He said, I am only the messenger of your Lord to give you news of a pure boy, Isa. She said, how can I have a boy while no man has touched me? I stopped doodling, stopped calculating how many minutes till the end of class, stopped thinking about the bag of chips in my backpack, stopped breathing for a second, my body caught in a moment of clarity that shoots through me and suspends my thoughts. Suddenly, my arm raises of its own accord, and before I'm aware of making any conscious decision, I'm speaking, my voice higher than usual and breathless. Miss, did Maryam say that no man has touched her because she didn't like men? There is a pause. 2 seconds of shocked silence before my classmates break into titters. Some roll their eyes. This sounds a lot like one of my infamous questions that derailed the class, and some of my classmates are annoyed that I've interrupted their get-out-of-jail-free summary of the classes they've skipped and the things they need to know for the midterm. But I'm grateful, so grateful for the tittering. It conceals my earnestness. I'm grateful for my earlier antics, that I get to play off this question as a moment of clowning instead of a sincere, burning desire for an answer. I need to know, is this a thing? Are there other women like me who don't like men? Who would tell a handsome, well-proportioned man angel who appeared before them to go away? Who have never been touched by men? Who don't want to be touched by men? The Quran teacher, a matronly Sudanese woman in her 60s who has always been kind to me, doesn't seem to read anything into my question, and mercifully she does not skip a beat in her answer. No, she says, it's because Maryam had taqwa. She had God consciousness in its highest state of being. It's because Maryam was pious and loved and feared God. She knew that the divine was watching her even if no one else was around, knew that the presence of God was everywhere, even if she couldn't see God. Maryam didn't want the privacy of her situation to tempt her into doing something with this beautiful man, something God wouldn't be happy with. Isn't that an excellent lesson to learn, girls? Don't ever forget that God is watching. When you're around boys, God is always watching. If you're alone with a boy, God is watching. If it's just the two of you somewhere, then God is the third. Remember Maryam, girls. Maryam turned to God. She asked the man to go away because she had taqwa. But I know differently. Maryam is a dyke. Isn't it obvious? Doesn't it make sense? She lives alone in a mosque with no one else around, no one to monitor what she does or whom she meets up with, and not a person in the world for company. One day, a handsome and well-proportioned man comes to her door unannounced. No one will know if he stays a while. No one will know what they do together. But before he can even talk, Maryam asks him to leave. No, thank you, she says. Please don't talk to me. She would rather have her solitude than the company of this handsome man. Eventually, she lets him stay, but only because he says he's an angel. She hears him out because he's an emissary from God, laughs heartily when he tells her she's going to have a baby. Who, me? She says. No man has ever touched me. No man. And I know she was pious. I know she was always aware that God was watching. But there's no hesitation, not even for a second, when she turns him down and bars him from her space. It must be because Maryam doesn't like men. Not handsome ones, not well-proportioned ones. These things don't even register for her. No man has ever touched her, she says. She hasn't let them. She hasn't been interested. Maryam is a dyke. Or maybe she isn't. Who knows? Dyke isn't even part of my vocabulary at 14, and maybe I'm reading too much into the story, these few lines of a text that's been around for 1400 years. But what I do know is this. Maryam is something, somehow, like me. I feel different that day after Quran class. Relieved at first, after the embarrassment dies down, after I'm done playing off the question as intentional, after I'm done receiving high fives in the hallways from my classmates for my joke. I'm relieved that no one has caught on, and I'm relieved that I'm not the only one like this. And after this relief comes elation. There are other women like me in the Quran. Women who are uninterested in men, who are born wrong, living lives that are entirely out of their control. Women who rage, rage to God no less about wanting to die. So that's the first excerpt, and I picked this because this sort of really gives a flavor for what I do in the book. I take these stories from the Quran, and sometimes I present the Quranic version through direct translation of the verses. But a lot of times, what I'm doing is I'm actually just retelling the stories as I know it, as I know them, as I heard them growing up, and sort of like as my personal interpretation and my personal take on them. To me, what's really interesting about these figures and characters in the Quran is not thinking of them as like saints and not thinking of them as infallible prophets, but instead thinking of them as like really, really human figures, people who make mistakes, people who make somewhat questionable decisions, people who, I disagree with or I agree with, and really looking at their stories as lenses to look at stories from my own life. The next section that I'll be reading is from a chapter named Muhammad, and it's the chapter itself is about sort of like really embracing my queerness, and just thinking of my queerness as this complicated thing that is that I didn't necessarily that feels like something that was given to me by God, in the same way that the Quran or the revelation was given to Muhammad. The other reason why I really wanted to read this section is because it's about queer and trans joy, and about sort of finding your people. And to me, that feels really important in the current climate, when there is this very sort of overt war, both in terms of administrative violence and in terms of healthcare, and in terms of so many things, specifically towards trans people. And I'm not someone who wants to excuse previous administrations, but there's something about right now that feels really, really overt, and so it's important to me to really think about queer and trans joy, queer and trans Muslim joy, and community. And so that's why I'm reading this section. There's sort of like two parts to the section. The first is a story, and then the second is direct. The second pertains to Muhammad, as in Prophet Muhammad, and it's in second person, but the you that's being talked to is Muhammad. So here goes. Join us for a performance of the Coming Out Muslim play, the email reads. LGBTQ plus Muslim meetup to follow for people who hold those identities. No allies, please. I get this message on an activist email group a few months after the queer birthday brunch, a few months during which I've been trying and failing to find queer Muslims in the city. This email, with its intentional wording, its nod to privacy and consideration of safety, feels like a sign. It feels like God is telling me to go. But still, I'm scared. The venue is 4 blocks away from my mosque. What if someone sees me going in? My cousin has just moved to the city for grad school. What if someone she knows is there? What if no one likes me? What if I'm not legible as queer? Just go, Billy tells me. He offers to walk me into the event, promises me that I can leave if I recognize anyone in there, that he'll pick me up after if I need a decoy. I'm touched anew at his kindness, but decline his help. This feels like something I need to do alone. But as soon as I walk in through the door for the meetup, it's clear that I'm not alone. The room is in the back of the theater and is small and sparsely lit, but in it are the most beautiful people I've ever seen, of varying genders and hairstyles and hijab styles, of varying ages, of varying shades of black and brown. The space has been set up so thoughtfully, with food in the back and in the front, and a person at the door whose job it is to welcome new folks. She gives me a sticker for my pronouns and directs me to a group of people who are standing around talking. The group greets me like a long-lost friend. They're talking about the play, telling their own coming out and not coming out stories. And it's easy to tell a few stories of my own, to not have to explain my queerness and Muslimness. It's easy to just be. I'm in bliss, drifting between the different groups of people and the snack table when I see a new friend take the mic. Manal, who I met a few minutes ago and instantly bonded with over our mutual love of well labeled food and similar Muslim upbringings, makes an announcement. A few of us are going to pray Maghrib now, she says. Folks are invited to join us or not, whatever works for you. The group separates and we shuffle into parallel lines. I move toward the back, expecting to join the women like I do at my mosque, when I notice that folks aren't segregating by gender, that people of all genders are praying side by side, shoulder to shoulder, equal in the eyes of God. It has never even occurred to me that I could pray this way, and I feel something bordering on euphoria as I make my way to the front line behind the imam, a row in which I've never prayed before. I even volunteer to say the iqamah. After the prayer, folks are starting to leave when someone comes in late, a person in a plaid shirt and funky blue glasses, sporting the classic queer haircut, short on the sides and long and curly on top, and so much butch swagger that the energy in the room changes. My jaw drops. They're an aspirational version of me, and I find myself wondering if they're an illusion, someone I manifested into appearing at this gathering that feels like a window into Jannah. But they're greeted with cheers of hi Zoo and hugs, and it's clear that they're very real and very loved. I get suddenly shy and drop back to the peripheries. Zoo does the rounds as I scramble to take down names and numbers before people leave, desperate to connect, desperate to recreate this magic again. Suddenly, they're beside me, talking to me. Don't worry about getting everyone's contact info, Zoo says. We meet up a lot. I'll loop you in. Thanks, I say, embarrassingly nervous for them to like me, cautiously ecstatic that they're seeing me as part of the community already. I'm worried I'm sweating through my one nice button down. I take a deep breath and decide to be vulnerable. I feel like I've been looking my whole life for this community. Well, get ready to be folded in, Zoo says. There's a lot we have coming up. A bunch of us are going to the Dyke March next week, and someone was talking about starting a book club. Oh, and have you heard of the LGBTQ plus Muslim retreat? They laugh at how wide my eyes get. And then they look at me, they look me up and down, take in my skulls and flower hijab, my butch jeans and dyke boots. You remind me a lot of myself when I was younger. I wore hijab and was the president of the Muslim Students Association in college. Listen, if you ever have anything you want to talk about, hit me up. All the axons in my brain are telling me to play it cool, but I override them all. Wait, are you saying you're willing to be my queer life mentor? I ask. Zoo laughs. I guess that's what I just signed up for. Finally, I'm home. You're 40 years old when you receive the wahi, and it changes your life and how you want to live it. You have some mishaps, make some mistakes along the way, but ultimately there's this. God takes care of you. God is gentle. God is kind. They tell you to just be. Do you. Teach the Quran, spread the message, be grateful for the sustenance and the signs from God. Be afraid of the day of judgment when everyone will be responsible for their own deeds. And God guides you to Islam first, then to a community of believers, then to a new city nearby, Medina. The inhabitants welcome you with a song set to drums, a paean so reverent that they address you in second person, too respectful to even say your name. Finally, your community can put down roots and build anew. Finally, you too are home. That's it for me.
Thank you so much. Again, I read this, but it's just so beautiful hearing it out, like in your own words. And again, there's so many great passages in this book. I mean, I kind of reread it for this event, and I'm thinking of so many different connections that I'm forming out of just reading this. And I guess, yeah, so I have some questions, obviously, and then I'll pass it on to the audience. And I think one of them really does sort of get into, you talk about all these stories of in the Quran, and sort of they all somehow really beautifully connect in terms of this experience of being a queer Muslim. I'm thinking about in particular, you start off with talking about Surah Maryam, and you sort of Maryam's plea to have never been existed and never known. And then later you talk about feeling
Mm.
like a jinn, sort of in a racial context, but then also again in a queer context within Muslim spaces, that you're unseen but seen are your words. And then you end on this note of the story of Yunus, which in biblical terms is Jonah being in the whale, and this sort of idea that the whale is this protective force, and you build these communities within a whale, and that not everyone has to know all the details of your queerness, particularly your family and Muslim community. And what's more important is sort of building these spaces that take care of you and sort of that protect you as sort of the outside world changes itself. So I guess my question there is, can you talk more about that sort of delicate balance of visibility within queer Muslim identity, and sort of how do you see Muslim communities moving forward, becoming more aware and caring of their queer members within that?
Hmm. That's such a good and thoughtful question. And there's so many parts and strands to it, Zarif. So if I miss anything, please.
You're good to
Uh,
answer whatever you want out of it.
okay, okay, okay. All right, okay, okay. But if there is anything I miss, remind me.
Yeah,
But I'm thinking about this. I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I've been thinking a lot about the navigating differences. I guess like essay or open letter or whatever that came out. I guess almost a year and a half ago now. For those that don't know, there was this letter that was signed by a bajillion imams and sort of like scholars. And was basically this letter slash joint statement by these Muslim imams, a lot of like sort of like big names in the community, and a lot of like scholars who are just like very well known, basically essentially sort of like condemning queerness and like condemning queer Muslimness, and just and doing this very sort of like right-wing Christian thing of oh, we shouldn't have to bend our faith to comply with sort of like liberal values. We should be able to teach what we want to our kids. We should all sorts of like moral panic, like what are you going to say to the kids, and just like and we shouldn't have to accept queerness and queer Muslims because this is sort of like against the tenets of our faith. And it was, really deeply, deeply disappointing. And in some ways, it brought to the surface a lot of things that people did already know. There was this almost like don't ask, don't tell policy a lot of times in various sort of like mosque spaces and Islamic centers. The Islamic center that I go to has a similar policy where it's very much like, everyone is welcome here, come as you are, but we're never going to talk about queerness. There's never going to be any sort of like queer programming. There's queer Muslims just need to sort of like figure it out for themselves in some ways. And so yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot with sort of like rage, especially since there are so many queer Muslims in community, and in some ways it feels like so much more for betrayal to have it come from Muslims, because these are the people that we fight Islamophobia alongside. These are the people that know what it's like to be marginalized, and in very like overt systemic ways, like these are people who know what it's like to be spied on. Like queer Muslims have been alongside the larger Muslim community when we were being sort of like spied on, when there were informants in our mosques. And, so it feels really, really enraging to have such a sort of like overt statement. And it makes me think a lot about this idea of sort of like being seen and unseen, and, the ways in which queerness feels both visible and invisible. I write about it a lot in terms of my book, this idea of seen and unseen, in terms of being a brown hijabi, and someone who wears hijab, someone in the sense that sometimes it feels like because of this sort of like overt systemic racism, I'm the feared one. I'm the one that is like a security threat, or that needs to be checked multiple times at the airport. But also there's this way in which people just sort of see through me. Sometimes it feels like people just don't even see that I'm there. So I'm really intrigued by that interplay. And I think about it a lot too in terms of queerness and in terms of Muslimness. So I don't know, there's this way in which queer folks, the world is very different from when I was a young person in growing up in the 2000s, in the early 2010s, in terms of queerness. Like there was this way in which queerness in general was very much like a don't ask, don't tell, or just, it was very rare to see queer people in media, to see queer out people. And some of that has shifted, but it's a real reminder that that the sort of homophobia, the systemic homophobia, the systemic transphobia, all of those are very real things for people now too, and will continue to be, it's important to sort of like fight against them and to resist them.
Yeah. Well, I'm again, you hit it so spot on. I mean, in my own experience, this is exactly what I observed too. And I remember when the letter came out last year, it was such an interesting moment because, it's like sort of don't ask, don't tell, but then suddenly you're denouncing this when no one was really, like again, that unseen but seen, that like it's not mentioned, but somehow it's on people's minds and they still feel like this needs sort of to come after it. But thank you again. Again, there's so much in this book, and I think talking about this even for 5 minutes does not do that justice. Like the entire book sort of centers that central conflict. But sort of a question I also had on another end of things is on the publishing end of things, because again, this is the first book I've really encountered that presents this sort of narrative, especially in memoir format. So I was wondering what was the process of sort of publishing this book? Because it is in many terms a quote unquote niche experience, but also it's a very novel one. So like, did you have difficulty in folks understanding the value of your story?
So in some ways I got really, really lucky, I feel like, with publishing this, because I didn't have a ton of experience writing sort of like bigger book projects. I'm not someone who had an MFA or, didn't have like a very sort of traditional route in terms of writing and getting writing published. I had written a few essays, and back in the days of people publishing essays on the internet. I was lucky enough through those essays, to find an agent who really, really got what I was trying to do. For any writers that may be in the audience looking for agents, I highly recommend querying Julia Cardon. That's Kardon. She really understood what I was trying to do. And I think what really stood out to me was from the get-go, she was very much like, hey, if you want to write this book anonymously, we will make that happen. And that to me was a big game changer. When I was writing this in the sort of like mid 2010s, it felt really hard and really difficult to put this out there without using a pseudonym. I was saying a lot of things that were fairly controversial in a lot of Abrahamic religions, including calling Maryam a dyke, and also, I also have this chapter about God as non-binary, which made a lot of people really angrier, interestingly, than calling Maryam a dyke, which I was really surprised at. But I was saying a lot of things, and it was really important to me to write this book anonymously. I didn't want to be Googleable. I wanted to protect myself, similar to this idea of Eunice and the whale, and being in the belly of the whale. I wanted that protection, and so my agent really, really got what I was trying to do. And when we submitted to various editors, and we're looking at different publishing houses, the responses that we got were also really intriguing, because we got a lot of we actually got a lot of both homophobic and Islamophobic responses. Like, some people who were like, "Oh, this is like such a niche story," or people who were like, "Oh, this won't work anonymously, because part of what makes this sort of like this intersection of identities is interesting is a real person, and having like a face, and like and having a person attached to it." And again, it was really important to me to write this anonymously, because I don't owe anyone anything in that sense. Like, I don't owe having like people being able to see my face, or people being able to sort of like go to readings where I'm in person. But so and then there were a lot of really interesting responses. This one person, this one editor was like, "Oh, I don't quite see how you could write a memoir anonymously, because that act of using a pseudonym creates distance between the reader and the writer, whereas a memoir is supposed to break that down," which I actually thought to be really bizarre, because I write pretty vulnerably in my book, and also there are other people who have written books under a pseudonym for various other reasons, and so somehow it's only this sort of like it's at this intersection that it feels like almost as like voyeuristic, like I need to know who you are and what you look like in ways that can't be conveyed in the written form. Anyway, so that was really intriguing, but I was able to find an editor who, again, was, a huge champion of what I was trying to do, and doing that anonymously. And also, it was really important to me when I was writing, that the book be sort of like unapologetically queer and unapologetically Muslim. Like, there were certain things that I wasn't really open to negotiating on. For example, I don't italicize any of the Arabic or any of the like du'as and the prayers, and the Arabic words in my book, because I wanted them to read as continuous. I didn't want the italicization to disrupt the feeling of reading. And my editor like really just understood that and really championed it, and had my back. There were certain things that I just didn't want to explain. I was like, there are these layers of meanings that people who understand the context of Islam will get, or people who understand the context of queerness will just understand. And I want to just leave it at that. I don't want to explain everything. And yeah, my editor really got it. So I feel like I was really lucky in that I had two people who just had my back, who would shut down anyone trying to push back on those things. And so even for example, the excerpt that I read, this idea of talking about Prophet Muhammad as addressing him as you, and in second person, and I feel like that's the sort of thing that someone who's Muslim, or specifically South Asian Muslim, will be able to understand in ways that other people won't, because there's this entire series of devotional poetry that is written to Prophet Muhammad, using the term you, because it's this idea that you respect the name Muhammad so much that you don't say it. So there are little things like that, or there's this point at which I talk about bad queer spoken word poetry, and I feel like that's again like something that someone who's queer knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so, yeah, there were all of these like layers that I wanted to leave in and not explain. And again, the only reason that I was able to do that was because I had two people who didn't make me feel like I was a crazy person for wanting these things and for making these sort of author choices. And that kind of they both let me as a debut author, as someone who had never really written before, for they really let me make these choices on my own.
That's amazing. Yeah, those responses are interesting, but honestly, like from other editors, but I'm also not surprised. I feel like the
Mm,
editing world is very complicated. But I think it's important that there's sort of those avenues available for queer writers, and especially again for a sort of identity that is so like invisible and sort of addressing all of
mm,
the politics behind even speaking like to your own experience, which is crazy that that itself has like even talking about your own life has so much consequence.
mm.
Um, but I'm going to be passing it on to the audience questions for the time being. I mean, if there ends up being a lull in those, I will switch back over to some other ones I prepared, but I think we have enough. So Halima Kazim asks, I'm intrigued by female sainthood in Islam and women in Islamic societies historically who were ostracized or killed because of being perceived as sexually deviant, not interested in men, including what could have been hidden slash unknown queerness. Did you come across any of these women in your research?
Halima, this sounds like an amazing book, and you should write it. I I can't say that I came across any of these in my research, but I am sure that they exist, and I personally would love to read this book. I know that there used to be a queer Muslim mosque in Chicago called Masjid al Rabia, which was based and the name was chosen for this person Rabia, and I'm blanking on the last name, and I'm blanking on sort of like any other sort of identifiers, but I know that they chose this person very specifically as a woman, as someone who was potentially queer, and I would honestly, I would love to read this book. I think also though, to me, going back and reading stories from the Quran, I feel like so many of the prophets are queer coded in particular ways. They're things that I can draw out that I feel so much like empathy for. I'm trying to think of I mean, like I think Asiya, who was the wife of the pharaoh, who was, very, very she's presenting it in the Quran as the one of like the best women to have ever lived. She was apparently really kind, and was, heavily tortured by the pharaoh for her faith. I reimagine an ending for her story in which she finds someone, and the someone that I think of is, I think of this like ungendered person. So it could be anyone. It could be this like queer person. It could be this woman. But she finds a life that is very different from the abuse that she put up with, and that she escaped from. And just thinking of her as a guiding sort of like queer figure. Yeah, but I would love to read this book. I'll look out for it.
Yeah, I really want to read that too. I'm so interested in that concept. Another question we have from Egan Dean, which I'm also curious about. So your title references Stone Butch Blues. Obviously Hijab Butch Blues, Stone Butch Blues, but they wanted to know if you could talk more about your experience reading that book and how it influenced this work.
Yeah. So I was in my early 20s when I read Stone Butch Blues, and it really changed for me what I thought writing could do. It like I remember reading it and just having my mind absolutely blown. It's just such a beautiful book. You know, it was written some time ago, but so many of the things that it talks about are so timeless. And it's this, again, it's this idea of telling a story, and it's a work of fiction, but it tells a story of this character who's experiencing homophobia, transphobia, police brutality, labor issues, class issues, and it just like takes these sort of like smaller everyday stories from this person's life and uses them to tell a larger story that is very, very political in its nature. And when I read it, I remember being like, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my writing. This is like an aspirational version of like how I want to write. And so I was really blown away by that. And actually, so fun fact, when I wrote this book and when I was when I was sort of like shopping this book around to different agents and editors, it was titled Maryam is a Dyke, which I really liked as a title because it's so unapologetic and so sort of like in your face with its queerness. But the closer that I got to publishing the book, the more uncomfortable I got with the title. There were a couple of reasons. One big reason was that I didn't want people to come to the book with a sort of defensiveness, and I didn't want people, specifically Muslim people who were reading it, to come to it being like, well, what do you mean Maryam is a dyke? This makes me so angry, or whatever. I wanted people to pick it up with without that sort of like baggage. And then the big reason was also that I just like didn't want straight people saying dyke so casually. There's dyke is a word that has been reappropriated in some ways, similar to queer, but there's still this sort of like violence attached to it, especially for older lesbians for who it was a very sort of like homophobic slur. And so I didn't want the book to carry that. And so I decided that I didn't want to use Maryam is a Dyke as a title. And so when I was thinking of what I did want to title it, I found myself thinking back to sort of all of our queer writing ancestors and just people whose books made it possible for my book to be out there in the world. And I really wanted to pay homage to Stone Butch Blues, which again was one of the first books that I read that had this central queer character and really just sort of taught me to write. And so that's how I ended up with HIJAB Butch Blues.
Yeah. And I mean, I think at the end of the book, you kind of talk to sort of the role of why, like you sort of have this like really cool manifesto almost at the end about why you're writing and why you're a writer. And one of those really is that the power of this book is that people will open it up with an open mind and can learn from it. And I think sort of that title also speaks to that. But another question we have sort of on this topic is you sort of describe at the beginning of the book that you know you're queer before having the language to describe it. And you also use various words to identify with that. Obviously, the D's word, queer, lesbian, gay, and butch. So the question the audience member is asking is, can you talk to us more about the terms you chose to use in the book and why?
That's a really, really good question. I also wrote this a really long time ago, or what feels like a really long time ago now. And, I feel like a lot of what has happened since is that my gender identity has really evolved. And so there's some terms that I actually, really, really still adore and have a lot of love for because of the historic nature of them. Like I love the word butch and I always will. It carries so much history and so much also violence and so much also sort of like pushing the boundaries of what was and wasn't acceptable. That to me, that word will always have a big place in my heart. I've been using the word non-binary for myself a lot more. I feel like I used to be shy about using it, but it's something that I've been using a lot more and a lot more openly. And woman is not really a word that I use for myself very much anymore. Sometimes I still use the word womanish or woman adjacent, but I'll reread like passages and be like, oh, I use this word for myself there, and kind of cringe a little bit. But that's sort of the story behind some of those terms. And what was interesting to me about writing the Maryam is a dyke line in particular was that I don't think I knew that word when I was 14, but I still felt it. Like I felt this way in which Maryam felt different to me. She felt like someone who was pushing the envelope in terms of gender, in terms of also just like standing up for herself. And to me, those are really embodied in the word dyke, also in the word butch. And yeah, and one of the things that I have been asked a lot about is why I don't speak more to butch identity in the book. But to me, there's a subtlety there that I wanted to capture. I also don't talk a ton about my experience about wearing hijab, but it pervades everything. And similarly, I think my gender identity also like pervades every interaction, everything that I write about, how I choose to dress myself, how people see me, how people don't see me. I think it just pervades everything. And so, yeah, the terms that I used, have kind of evolved. And I'm working on a second project right now, and a lot of that book is going to be about how they've evolved. Yeah, that's kind of the story behind some of what I use in the book.
Yeah. I guess flagging that someone in the audience, well, I guess for context, they read it and they got copies of your book for their Muslim studies students, but they also do
Oh,
want to hear more about what you're working on next. So I don't know how anonymous or under wraps this is, but if you want to talk more about upcoming projects you have, including that.
yeah, it's actually not under wraps or a secret at all. It's so I'm working on this book, which is due out in 2027. So it's a whiles away, but I'm writing it sort of like as I speak. So I found myself, I had a baby recently. I have a almost 3-year-old now, who is very rambunctious, and anyone who is a parent to a toddler knows that they're batshit insane. But I've been thinking a lot about sort of like the contradictions and complexities of parenting, specifically as a queer, brown, non-binary immigrant, and pairing that with some of the complexities and contradictions of the names of God. So in Islam, there are these 99 names of God that describe sort of like the moral characteristics of God. And a lot of them are really nuanced, and a lot of them are deeply contradictory. Like there's this name of God in which God calls themselves, the Punisher or the Avenger. And then there's also this name of God in which they call themselves Al-Halim, like the one who is so patient that they wait for others to come around. And I really want to explore those things, especially in the context of sort of like parenting, and just really, parenting does this thing to you where it really causes you to like clarify a lot of what you would otherwise sort of like sweep under the rug. Like my kid is like constantly asking questions and constantly asking why, and I look forward to a lot more of that as she grows even older. But yeah, so just using using the 99 names of God as like a starting point to explore contradiction and just be sort of like and really embrace contradictions, and really really embrace the messiness of this thing that we're all doing called life.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, it's due out in 2027, so we're a whiles away, but I'm really enjoying writing it. I went through a brief period where I was like, I'm going to write fiction. And I was just like really wrestling with it. Like it just wasn't coming. And then I started writing this book and it felt like, it felt like exactly what I wanted to be doing. So that feels really exciting. I'm someone who gets very sort of like crush like almost with writing. When something feels exciting, all I want to be doing is doing. All I want to do is write. And so I'm in that phase of it where it feels really exciting and it feels really generative.
Yeah. I mean, I'm making a mental note to keep tabs on this book when it comes in 2027. But what you're saying about writing, I relate to. I'm a writer myself, and I think it
Mm,
definitely. I've I have many moments where I want to write something, but instead something else is coming out. I have to like push that aside.
mm.
Um, but I guess sort of as a last question, which this one's for me, I've just been curious. So you write under a pseudonym. Why did you choose this pseudonym?
Mm. Oh, okay. This is like really unrelated to everything, but uh, so when I was a kid, my mom would always tell me that she really wanted to name me Lamya when I was born, but because of patriarchy, my dad's mom got to choose the name, and she just like she had my name picked out. She was like, okay, this kid is going to be named this. And my mom just like always, I don't think regret is the right word, but my mom always, grew up telling me and my brother what our alternate names were. And so when I was picking a name, I really wanted to honor that, this way in which she didn't get to name me what she wanted to name me, but also this way in which it's I grew up thinking of this alternate life that I would have led had my name been Lamya, uh, and so when I started writing, it felt natural to sort of explore that.
I mean, yeah, those are like the best kinds of pseudonyms, like those sort of alternative lives and those ones that have significance. But I mean, that's exactly the kind of cool story I want to hear in the first place, and not just you flipped open a book and pulled out a random name. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us, talking about this book, writing it, doing everything, writing your following up book. It's meant a lot to me. I feel very
Mm,
understood and empowered from it. And I just think the book does so much to challenge sort of conventional notions of queerness. And by conventional, I also mean white.
mm,
Um, and just like sort of present this very thought out and radical way of sort of queer Muslim identity, but also queer identity in general, sort of
mm,
challenging all these narratives and these requirements that are really put in place by this like the majority in power.
mm,
But and I really loved the emphasis on sort of building this community, which you called your whale, but sort of building those chosen and unchosen families and finding meaning in your religion and culture for yourselves. I really loved sort
mm,
of how you chose to interpret all these chronic stories and relate them to your life and sort of again like even talk about like, oh, this is what people normally think, but there's other ways to think about this.
mm.
But I'm very grateful, and I hope, or I know, I will carry sort of the sense of justice and advocacy you have in your writing in my own life, and I'm sure many people in the audience can say the same. So thank you
Mm.
so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'll just jump in, and I think you all agree this was a fantastic conversation facilitated by Zarif. So I know feels weird to sit in your own room with a computer screen and applaud, but just join me in thanking all the contributors for today. Thank you all for attending. Sign up to our mailing list, follow us on Instagram, and come back to one of our events. Thank you so much, Lamia, and thank you, Zarif.